welcome to the Take and Make kit for Maker Day. This is the Gnome craft. My name is Hannah and I'm with Aurora Public Library. What you received in your kits, or if you weren't able to get a kit, this is sort of a rundown of what is included in the kit exactly. Just a little bit. So this is what we're making. We're making some gnomes. I've got some in different sizes and colors, and this is what you're getting in your kit. So basically what is in your kit is a sock filled with a little bit of rice, about a quarter cup, maybe a half cup, an elastic, some polyester filling, some felt or wool fabric, some patterned fabric, some fur trim, an embroidery needle, embroidery thread, which is about 1 meter, 2 pom-poms, 2 wooden beads, and a plastic mug, and a partridge in a pear tree. Just kidding about that last one. But this is sort of what's in the kit. And then I have a few items here that are not included in the kit that I'm going to explain. The first one, which is pretty important for this craft, is a glue gun. So you're going to want a glue gun and some sticks. You can use another glue that's strong. It just will take everything a little bit longer to dry for that glue to set if you're using like a regular white glue, or if you're using super glue, you could do that, but with fabric as thin as this, you sort of run the risk of it bleeding through and getting stuck on your fingers or your clothing. So I would recommend a glue gun if you have one. They're not terribly expensive. I also have some markers, which I'll explain, and some scissors, and a piece of chalk, which is totally optional. The red solo cup is not because I'm having a party. It's just an old cup. So what I use the markers for, so you've got 2 pom-poms in your kit. One is white, they're both white, but one was colored using marker dye. So this one I've actually trimmed down a little bit. And what I did was I took about a teaspoon of some water and I dipped a brown marker. You use a red marker or a pink marker or a black marker. The only purpose of this is to give the pom-pom a slightly different color. So because our trim for the beard is bright white, it just looked a little weird having another bright white pom-pom as the nose. You can do whatever color you like. I just wanted something a little bit different. So here's sort of an example of what it looked like. So it's kind of like a rosy nose this guy's got. It's not quite brown because I mixed it with water, but basically I dipped the pom-pom in that sludgy solution, and I'm sure you could use tea or paint if you wanted to do that as well. Or you could just color it, like if you wanted a brown nose, you could do that. If you wanted a pink nose, or options are endless for what color you want the nose to be. I just didn't want something that was the same color as the beard. The other thing you might want to use the marker for is to color the beard itself. So I tried it. I didn't love the way it looked, but maybe you have better markers. You might also have a color of beard that isn't entirely white, and you don't have to worry about this at all. But it is easy enough to sort of just take a plain marker and just sort of gently drag it over the beard. And that'll give you just a little bit of color, which is kind of nice. And you can sort of lift that first layer of fur up and do some of the underside as well. So that's an option. You don't have to do it. The craft is your oyster. You can make it whatever you like. But that is an option. You could use like a black marker and make a more of a like salt and pepper look if you like. That would look nice too. But so that's just an option, and that's why I have the markers. The scissors are going to be important. The chalk is just to mark on the fabric where to cut, so not essential but useful to have, but you could also use a pen. Okay, so let's get going. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a strip of this patterned fabric, or the red fabric in my case, just a narrow strip. So I'm just using what was sort of attached to my larger patch here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it to be just long enough to cover my pipe cleaner. So mine is kind of a wonky shape, but that's okay. And basically all I want it to do is wrap around my pipe cleaner nicely. And just going to trim you in there. This isn't a terribly straight piece, so I'm just going to trim it a little bit. And so this is going to end up being our arms for the gnome, and it's going to be glued to the body eventually. So we want that pipe cleaner, which is going to give some shape to the arms and allow them to kind of wrap around nicely. But we want it to be covered in the red fabric, so it looks like a jacket or a smock. So my pipe cleaner is not perfectly straight, but that is not an issue. So I'm going to use my hot glue, and I'm going to go just shy of the end of the fabric, and I'm not going to worry too much about the ends at all, because with each of these, except maybe this guy, I've trimmed it quite a bit. So knowing that I'm going to cut off the end, I'm not going to worry about it too much. And I'm also not going to worry that it's perfect, because who's got time for that? But the way I'm going to do this is put the pipe cleaner in the middle of the fabric here, and I'm going to glue about 1 inch at a time as I sort of fold over, and then I'll put a dab of glue there, and then kind of seal up that little arm, and I'm going to do it roughly 1 inch at a time with my hot glue. All right, here we go. And I'm going for a round shape, but I'm sure I'm not going to get it all the time. But nothing to worry too much about. You want to make sure you're getting the glue as close to the edge as you can, so that you don't have like a big chunk of the end of the fabric kind of sticking out. Just continuing with my rolly pattern here. By the end of this craft, you will have hot glue strands all over the place. So it's best if you can just come to terms with it early and not worry about trying to stay neat. Also, the fur trim sheds like a golden retriever, so that will also be everywhere, so keep that in mind. It's not the neatest craft we've ever done. Okay, so I've got maybe 4 inches done on that side of the arm. Just going to continue here and really make it a mess. I'm already needing another glue stick. That's why I made sure to bring in extras. And I'm just working in roughly a couple inches at a time. Okay, so here I have a tube of red fabric wrapped around my pipe cleaner. It is not the prettiest thing in the world, but that is okay, especially in the middle, because that's going to be glued towards the back of the gnome. So my gnome is mostly going to be stationary wherever it ends up living, but some people might want to treat this like an elf on the shelf kind of deal, so you might want to pay more attention to the way that the back of your gnome looks in that circumstance. Okay, so we're done with the arm. The next we're going to get going on is the actual body of the gnome. So you can do this a couple ways. You'll notice that, I'm going to get rid of this ugly cup. You'll notice that we have these gnomes and they're different shapes and sizes. So this is where you're going to want to decide how big you want your gnome body to be. So this guy is much taller, his body ends sort of The bodies end sort of at their nose. I haven't glued the hats down just so that I can kind of show you. But this guy is sort of nice and tall, where this guy is sort of more short and squat. So I'm gonna open up my sock filled with rice, and mine's covered in brown marker stain because I left the cap up in the bag because I'm a genius. And you've got lots of polyfill, so you can do that sort of however, in whatever style you want, making it short and squat or tall and skinny, and use sort of as much polyfill or as little polyfill as you like. The rice is just going to act as a way to help it balance a little bit, give it a bit of weight, because we do want it to be freestanding. So I don't want this to be too giant. I'm going to lean more on the tall and skinny side. Sort of my green hat guy, and I'm going to turn around the ugly brown sock stain of marker. I might put a little bit more in. And this is sort of your last chance to change the shape of the way you want this to be, so make sure you're kind of satisfied with how it's turned out. So I'm pretty happy with that. I've got a decent amount of rice at the bottom, so I know he's gonna stand up tall and then hold his own head up. I'm gonna wrap my elastic around this. You could sew the sock shut, you could cut off the excess, which I might end up doing because that is kind of a lot. But basically you just want it to be out of the way, because the red fabric's going to be wrapped around it, and then the hat's going to go on top. So this is mostly going to be hidden, but I think I'm just going to do a slightly better job of the elastic, and then I'll leave it be. Okay, so there's the basic shape that I'm going to be working with. Get rid of my excess polyfill there. Give myself a little bit more space to work with. Okay. And so now I'm going to take my red fabric, and you can do, you can cover it however you like. I sort of went with two different ways to do it. So the short and squat gnome, what I did with him was what I call the hobo technique, which is to wrap the fabric sort of around like a hobo sack. And then I just sort of glued everything into place as nicely as I could, focusing one side looking better than the other because that was going to be my front side. The other option is to do more of like a roll. So that's what I did with this tall guy. So he's kind of shaped more like a pop can or a beer can. And I found that used less fabric, but it also meant that the short and squat guy was a little bit harder to cover in that way. But anyway, it does use not as much fabric, so I'm probably going to go with that this time as well. And so I'm going to roll it around, and I'm going to just not worry too much about the bottom, because I'm going to have enough fabric at the top here that I'm just going to cut out a bit and cover the bottom with a small swatch of fabric there. I'm going to go a little bit higher up. I'm not too concerned about what the bottom's going to look like at all, but I do want the actual fabric to be wrapped up nicely. Okay, so you can kind of see I've got a little bit of space at the bottom. I've put the actual sock about an inch in before I started rolling, and so that stuff I'm going to fold over once I put that other swatch in the middle. So I'm going to trim my fabric a little bit here. I don't have too long of an overlap. And this doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to grab my glue gun again. And same technique, just working like an inch or two at a time. And I'm going to put a generous amount of glue. And just make sure it's sort of nice and tightly wrapped, and then hold it in place as the glue dries. And then just work my way up to the top. I'm fighting with these strands of glue the whole way. Okay, so that's what the back looks like. It's not terrible, it's not the best, but that's okay, I'm not too concerned. And I've got some more fabric here. So this might be a spot where I'll probably take the elastic off and add the red fabric to it. So I've got the sock filled with the polyfill and the rice, and then now my red fabric. So let's see, do I have enough from this little bit here? If I cut off the thickest part, let's see. If I tuck that, oh yeah, he'll be lots of room. Okay, so I'm gonna take just like a 2-inch scrap of fabric, and I'm gonna put it nice side out, attach it to the very bottom of my gnome. And now I'm going to glue the top of that to the bottom. And before I do that, I better close my elastic. Do it like that. So I've got my sock and my red fabric kind of commingling. Get my elastic on there, secure everything in place. Okay, so I've got this red tube. Now I'm going to go back to that bottom part and as neatly as I can glue it all down. And again, just going a little bit at a time. The bottom, you don't want to worry too much about how it looks, but you do want it to sit flat. So just keep that in mind. You want to kind of maintain the flatness on the bottom so that he's going to stand nicely. Ugh. Oh, it's drying enough already. Okay, so I've got my basic shape. Almost looks like he's got feet at the bottom. I could neaten that up if I wanted to, but I'm not going to worry too much about it. Now we've got our arm and our body sort of ready to go. Just going to get rid of some of this glue. Okay, so now we are ready to start working on our hat. I'm going to get my glue gun out of the way just for a bit. Okay, so there's a right side and a wrong side to this fabric. If it's the fabric you've got, you might have some felt or another pattern fabric. So what I'm going to do is turn my best looking side to the bottom, and I'm going to measure where I want to cut it for the hat. So I might just do like a triangle shape, and I'm going to err on the side of caution when I'm cutting because I can always make it smaller, but once I've cut it, I can't make it any bigger. So I'm going to keep that in mind. So I've got my gnome guy here. If I wrap, I want it to cover basically a couple inches down. So the top of my pile of sock and fabric is at the top there. I want to make sure that I've got sort of a good amount of that covered. and then sort of wrap it around and figure out my shape there. So I could do a triangle. I think what I'm actually going to do is sort of a bit of a roll technique. So I'm rolling it, and I'm going to take my chalk and make a mark there and sort of follow it up on a diagonal. So roughly that. So I'm going to save that for later because I'm going to need it. And I'm just going to do that process again. I'm going to roll this. And just kind of work it bit by bit into a cone shape. Just a process of cutting and measuring and cutting again. And again with this, I'm not going to be too worried about what the back looks like, but I just want to make sure that the two ends meet. And you might find that you like it sort of longer in the back, like I've got on this guy. Sort of makes it easier to put the hat on, but you don't have to. Okay. Okay, so I've got my basic shape here. I'm not going to glue the hat into its final cone shape yet because I want to do my embroidery. So I'm going to mark out sort of what's the middle of the hat, just in some chalk. So I know that when it's all done and wrapped up, I want the middle to be roughly here. And I'm going to use that as a very loose guide. And I'm going to take my embroidery needle and embroidery thread. So I've already threaded the needle. And I'm going to just do any basic shape. So I'm going to copy what I did here just because it's fast and easy. But this is one of the ways that you can really customize this craft however you like. You can spend a lot of time picking a pattern. You can do trees. You could embroider a name on it if you liked. You could, you know, make it your own in this way. I'm just going to do 3 simple stars in the middle. And then I'm going to do a stitch at the bottom, a more decorative stitch, which is totally up to you if you don't want to do it, but let's look at this. You could also use different kinds of thread if you had sort of different colored embroidery cloths, or you could decorate it with like buttons or stickers. You could embroider initials, you could write a name. This is sort of one of the nice ways you can make it sort of however you want it to be. Okay, so I've got my first star here. It's not perfect, but that's okay. And I'm just going to do 2 others on the side and a little bit lower down, just for fun. Okay, so just a really simple 3-star pattern here. I'm going to cut the thread here, and then because I am very lazy, I'm not going to tie a knot in it. I'm just going to put a dab of glue on the back. All of that is going to be sort of hidden anyway. And now I'm going to do what's called a blanket stitch at the bottom. So this is a pretty easy technique. I'll show you. So you're going to go like roughly a centimeter up from the bottom of the fabric here, and try not to get it tangled. Whoops. Let's try that again. Okay. So it's kind of, it always screws up in my head for how I'm supposed to do this. So I'm just gonna do one basic stitch here. So I just wrapped it around the middle, and now I'm going to just loop that through the bottom little bit of fabric, or thread, sorry. And then I'm gonna go about a centimeter in the other direction and put my needle through, and then I'm going to pull it through, but before I get to the end of the thread, I'm going to put my needle back in that loop at the bottom, and then pull that, not too tight, but that's sort of what gives us that line of thread at the bottom and then the lines at the top. So you can kind of see how it will end up looking when it's all done. It's a pretty easy stitch and it goes pretty quickly. And just remember that you don't have to pull too tight on the thread. You want to sort of be able to maintain the shape of the fabric without pulling it too tight. And just work your way through the end of that little piece of fabric at the bottom. You can also do the side if you like. I didn't bother. That's the side where it's going to be glued up together. It's going to be at the back anyway, but you can do it however you like. Okay, cut my thread there. bit of my needle for now. Dab of glue to glue the last thread into place. Okay, so now the hat is embroidered. We've got our heart at the bottom, leaking glue everywhere, our blanket stitch at the bottom, and our stars in the middle. Everything's looking very nice. So the next step is to glue the hat shut, basically. So I'm going to go back to my gnome and make sure that it is dry. Actually, no, we don't need the gnome right now. I know he's going to fit on the bottom. So the felt is a little bit finicky in the way that once you put the hot glue and glued the two pieces together, it's not very forgiving as much as like the thinner fabric might be. You might have a couple seconds of leeway before the glue really dries and sets. But this is a much thicker material, so you want to make sure that when you're gluing it, it's in the exact right spot. And there's no perfect way to do it, so I'm just going to follow my same pattern of doing it roughly an inch or two at a time. And I'm going to go as close to the edge as I can here. And just fold it over. Just going to trim that last little bit. Okay, so there is my hat. I actually like that it's a bit wonky shaped. It doesn't sit flat. I've got the tail at the back a little bit longer. I'm not too concerned. I like them to be a little funny shaped, but if you wanted it to be sort of mathematically appealing, you might want to sort of go with that straight triangle shape and glue that together. But I've got my hat and I've got my body, so I'm just going to see what it looks like when it's on. Match up the back of my fabric with the back of my hat. Okay, so I've got a nice kind of snug fit when I put them down on the, I'm going to trim that a little bit more. There we go. So got a nice pointy hat, and I've got a snug fit, and I've got my blanket stitch done and my star patterns on it, and basically I'm ready to move on. Okay, so the next stage is the fun fur is what it's called. Yours might look a little bit different, but this is what mine looks like. So it's kind of this really fine beard hair, and then it's like a rectangular cut piece on the back. So what I'm going to do is trim this so that it's, draw a little marker of what I'm going to do. I want it to be a triangle. So it's just going to involve trimming a little bit off, just these two little triangles I'm going to trim off. When you're cutting this, you have to be really careful that what you're doing is slipping the blade of these scissors under just this little piece of fabric and not the actual fur. If I were to just, you know, do a big cut here, it would cut everything off and you wouldn't get sort of that long beard at the bottom, which is what you want. So you have to do it, you know, a really small amount of time, or sorry, a really small amount of cut at a time, like a centimeter at a time, slowly with sharp scissors, and just make sure that you're not cutting that actual beard hair. And you don't have to do this, but it does sort of give your gnome a nice shape to his beard. Okay, and the way I know that I've done it right is because I've cut all the way through, but it's still attached, and I have to pull it apart because the beard fibers themselves are sticking together. So I know I did it right, and I only cut the bottom of the fabric there. So I'm going to just cut this side as well. Okay, so now I've got kind of a nice triangle shape on the back, and that means I've got a nice kind of beard shape from the front. You can adjust that however you want, but that's sort of the basic shape. And now I'm going to decide where I want it to live for the rest of eternity on my gnome. So you really want the beard hair to be just under where the brim of the hat comes down. So, and I am going to glue it into place. So if my hat comes down to that, I'm going to glue my beard just a little bit under that. So it's going to make the hat harder to get on, but that's okay. So I'm going to ballpark it and use that line of fabric, and that's where I'm going to glue my beard. I'm just going to glue the very top ridge of the fabric, and be careful here because the hot glue and the fibers from the beard love each other, and they will turn into one homogeneous mass very quickly. So just be careful that you're not gluing the actual beard hair down. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I've got my beard glued on. I'm going to put my hat back on. You can totally glue the hat down if you like. I haven't done any of these just because I wanted to be able to show how they come apart and sort of what is under the hat for purposes of making more. Okay. So once you put the beard on, it's a little harder to get the hat onto where it was. That's kind of the point. We want to nicely hide the very top of the beard under the hat, so it looks like his little face is just entirely smushed under the hat. That being said, if you wanted to, you could put like googly eyes or, you know, some more facial shapes instead of just the nose. If you wanted to do that, that would look nice too. Okay, so he's coming into his own here. Got my beard here brushed down. So the next thing we are going to do is we're gonna work on the arms again. So the last couple steps are gluing the hands, which are the wood beads, onto the arms, gluing the mug to those, and gluing the arms themselves to our gnome. So like I said before, I ended up trimming this quite a bit. This guy has got much longer arms, you can kind of see. These two guys don't have mugs at all. This guy at the back has mugs. So if you're sort of putting the kit together on your own and buying things sort of at the dollar store, you might have a hard time finding these little mugs. We actually 3D printed these on our 3D printer, but you can also purchase them. It's basically like a doll-sized mug. But if you want to avoid that altogether, what I did with this guy, whose arms kind of nicely stay held together, I just glued a little plastic stick, which is sort of the tag that you find on clothing when you buy it. It's sort of what ties the garment to the price tag. So I took one of those and I put a dab of glue on it and I put it in one side of the bead, and then I did the same on the other end. And that just sort of means that his hands stay together like he's, you know, singing a carol. So that's another option if you don't have a mug or don't want to use a mug, but I think the mug is pretty darn cute. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, so I'm going to take my arms and place them at the back. You can decide however high you want them to be on the body. I liked mine a little bit higher so that they kind of wrap down, if that makes sense. So they're pretty close to the hat at the back, and then wrap around the front, sort of to the mid to low end of the beard. That's how I kind of like that. So I'm going to take the middle of my arms here, roughly. I'm going to put a generous spot of glue there, right on the back. I'm going to lay my gnome with the seam side down onto that. And I'm sure the arms aren't exactly equal, but that's okay, because I know I'm going to trim them. They're way too long. Okay, another thing that's up to you is how much you want to glue them. So you could have them sort of just free like this if you want, but I'm actually going to put some glue under this side as well so that they have a little bit more structure to them. And that is very easy to do. Again, just making sure I don't have a ton of beard hair in the spot where I'm about to glue. I'm going to lay the arm flat, big dab of glue, and wrap it around the front with a little bit going downward, because I do want the arms to start high at the back and have a bit more of a downward pattern. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to do the same here. Try to roughly match it up, but not going to think too much about it. Oh no, I lost a wood bead. Maybe I lost two. I should grab some more. I'm going to put something over there. Oh, we're stealing my beads. Okay, so I have my arms glued in place as much as I want them, and now I'm going to trim it. So about 1 centimeter, maybe 2 centimeters off on each. And what I want is to have enough room for the hands of the wood beads to hold the mug. So I think that's still too long. Trim another little chunk off. Okay, so if I have one hand, I'm going to go just a little bit more. Okay, so what I'm going to do is place some glue right in the middle of the bead and then a big bump on the bottom, and I'm going to stick it directly onto that part. And I don't worry too much about how neat this looks because we're going to cover it up. Okay. this is not remotely pretty, but that's what it looks like. And I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. I might just trim this guy a little bit more. And hopefully, however much you're trimming it, you're doing it on equal sides, so you don't have a really lopsided, long-armed gnome on just one side. So hole in the middle of the bead, and then big blob of glue, and just press and hold it onto the bottom of the arm. Okay, so you probably notice you have an ugly line of glue here, and that's what we're gonna fix now. So I'm taking a bit of my fabric left over, and I'm just gonna cut like a 1 centimeter strip. And I'm going to wrap it around and make it like a cup, which I just think is insanely adorable. And that's how I'm going to hide sort of the multitude of sins that I made with that glob of glue. So I'm going to do a little bit on this side. And just make sure that the seams are meeting up sort of on the inside of the hands where you're going to see it the least. Glue here. And just press and hold that down while it dries. Okay, so I've got 1 cup done. Just glue absolutely everywhere. Okay, so now I've got the arms done. This arm looks a little longer, that's okay. I can bend him a little bit. Got my arms done, and I'm ready to glue my mug. So what I found was the handle of the mug was hard to glue. So what I did on my last guy was I put a small bit of felt on the handle, and that seemed to help it stick a little better. So that might be something you want to consider. But for right now, I'm just going to glue, put a bunch in that hole, a little bit on the outside. And I'm not gonna worry too much about having too much. And I'm gonna stick my mug sort of right here. I'm figuring that this gnome is right-handed, so he would be holding the mug with his right hand. But however you want to do it is completely fine. Okay, so yeah, for some reason this side of the mug worked fine, stuck fine, but the handle side not so much. So I'm actually going to try it with that glue in the middle, glue on the outside. And put my mug right here, put the handle in his hand. Then I'm going to hold it longer than I've held anything so that it'll dry, but trying to keep it off of the beard hair. What would have probably been a good idea is for me to put a piece of fabric on the beard hair in between, just while I'm doing the gluing process, so I don't glue anything weird into place. So that guy didn't stick either. Bummer. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is take like a really small piece of felt, and I'm just doing this because for whatever reason it seems to help the glue stick. I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to do it. So just the tiniest little scrap of fabric there, glue under it, glue over it. Then I'm going to go back and stick it onto my mug. I'm going to press it down so that you can't really see the felt as much as possible. Okay, so it's holding. I'll take it. And okay, we are on sort of our last couple steps here. So I'm just going to tilt my hat down a little bit more. Find the middle, and I'm going to stick my nose right there. You could also use like a wood bead for the nose if you wanted to do that. Entirely up to you, or a button, or you know, if you wanted to go all out and do his whole face. Okay guys, so that's pretty much it. The last thing I'm going to do is take just the smallest amount of my polyfill, and I'm going to put that in the mug because it kind of looks like steam off of his latte or hot chocolate. And that's it. You've got a gnome that is freestanding. He likes his life. He's nice and tall, and you can hide him around your house, or you can make him lots of extra buddies to hang out with, make a whole little village of gnomes. Entirely up to you. And that is the end of our craft. So thank you for joining us. I hope you had fun. Camera's wobbly. And join us for our next Maker Day activity. Bye.